So, as you all know, tonight's very special. We have one of our founding members, Dr. Riddle. So, I'm going to let him go ahead.
Pleasure to be here. I realize in coming, I started teaching in 1962. This is 50 years. The last class I taught, I should say, was 2 years ago. And reflecting about the past, I think that I've had this thought before, it was reinforced, that the greatest professional return that I got in those 50 years was the Jefferson Scholar Program. I mean, it has been so wonderful, so gratifying, and so important to me. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about its history. That's what I do. So the history I teach is ancient and medieval. So when I use dates, it was my memory. I'm not responsible unless the date is at least 600 years old. So I'm just might be estimating. And I'm going to estimate. The Jefferson Scholar Program began about 1982. I say about because it was in the idea of Ed Glazner, who was then a dean in agriculture. One of the most genteel, nicest people you will ever meet. Unfortunately, he's in a senior citizen home, and otherwise he would be here. Because I mean, the program. He had the idea of this: we're getting good students, but two things. One is they specialize, but then don't have a good general education in liberal arts, or they're in liberal arts and don't have the kind of specialty depth of understanding in the science. Especially was that true, he thought, in agriculture. So he thought of the program of a double major. It was first idealistic, and secondly it was practical insofar as he felt that it would fit the job market. And, well, I guess it did. At any rate, I discussed it with him, and he discussed it with Bill Toole, who was then the Dean of Humanities and Social Sciences. That had just been changed because before that it was the School or the College of Liberal Arts. But there was some real conservatives on the Board of Trustees who thought too much of this liberalism being taught. And so he decided we have to change the name of our school, our college, and so he came up with Humanities and Social Sciences. A motion was made on the floor to call it the School or the College of Conservative Arts, but it didn't pass. So, at any rate, Bill Toole, another wonderful person, he wrote a grant proposal because the Kellogg Foundation was putting some big money that coming year into higher education. Kellogg's wanted the best students to go into agriculture, and they didn't think that was happening. And so they had proposals, and we put in the proposal. Bill Toole is the one who really wrote it. And then we got word from the Kellogg Foundation that they didn't particularly like our proposal. Number one, we called it the Kellogg Fellows. And secondly, it was for scholarships, and they had never given money for scholarships and had a policy, or foundation policy against it. So, boy, we were sunk. But there was going to be a meeting in Gainesville of all people in higher education that was interested in this. And so Ed Glazner and I went to see if we could talk our way into the program. And there turned out to be about 2,000 people there in higher education. Everybody wanted a hand in that pot. And Ed Glazner said to me, with this many people, it's going to be hard to get to them personally. If you ever get to see somebody on the foundation personally, move around and see if you can't charm them into our proposal. Okay. There was an afternoon in which there was an excursion and you could pick where you wanted to go. And for some reason or another, I picked Derry. Wasn't much choice. And I sat right in the front seat of this bus, and coming next to me was this big man, and he sat down, and we introduced ourselves, and lo and behold, he was the president of the foundation. And so I thought I would work my charm, and then once he got to know me, he would fund the proposal. Well, it didn't turn out that way. While I was sort of working up to it, we pulled into our first dairy farm, and we started traipsing across the field, and I had on good shoes and good dress, and most people had dressed for the farm, and as I walked gingerly, watching where I was walking, he said to me, excuse me, he said to me, "You've never been on a farm before, have you?" And I said, "Oh, yes, yes." And then I said, "Oh, my Lord, I just lost the proposal because I didn't step in, was watching my step." And Ed Glazner said afterwards, said, "Have you met anybody in the foundation?" I said, "Yeah, I met the president." "Good. What did he say?" And I said, "Well, I was afraid to mention proposal." Well, about a month later, Bill Toole, Dean, calls me up about 11 o'clock in the morning, and says, "John, big surprise, the Kellogg Foundation people are here. They're staying," it was then the Hilton, then Brownstone, what is it now? The hotel right next to the Y? Come on, some of you know. Brownstone? Okay. Anyway.
The corporate inn.
He said, "Come by and pick me up, we'll meet them for lunch." And so I walked from the horrendous building, Harrelson Hall, once I determined my location, to his office. And as we're walking down the street, he said, "You know, they're coming here because they think something is up, because we thought they had turned us down." And he said, "But there's one problem." I said, "What?" He said, "They will not allow their name to be used for the program." And I said, "Well," he said, "what are we going to do?" I said, "Name it the Jefferson Scholar Program." And he said, "What?" And I said, "Jefferson is what we want, and that is with science, agriculture, and democracy and philosophy. And that is the epitome." He said, And I said, "Then we can expand it to other, well, I say schools, colleges." And I said, "Engineering, we can have the Benjamin Franklin Scholars." I just heard yesterday that there are over 100 Ben Franklin Scholars now. And then we can have in business, we can have the Alexander Scholars. He said, "What about Pam's?" I said, "Madame Curie." And then he said, "Well, what about forestry? It's now natural resources." And I couldn't think of it. I said, "Paul Bunyan." Textiles was going to be Whitney Scholars. And he didn't say anything. We had lunch with them, and then after we ate, the president of the foundation says, "We like your proposal, but we don't want the people to be called Kellogg fellows." And I said, "We're going to call them the Jefferson Scholars." And that's how it started. They funded it, and that was wonderful. Now, at first, they put a stipulation in that people had to be considered in agriculture to be a fellow. So when we interviewed students, and they were good students, if anyone said medicine, we had to exclude them, no matter how good they were. And so we would try our best to say, well, are you considering another major? And we worked it that way. The two things that we put in right at the beginning is that the program would have excuse me, I'm sorry. I've been used to do all those cable shows, interactive. We would have a dedicated seminar each year so that the Jefferson Scholars could get to know one another intellectually as well as socially. The other thing is that we would have an excursion each year, off campus, someplace that the students would select, nearly as possible. And by the way, when the Park Scholars came along, they imitated us on both those things. They borrowed from us. The students we got from the beginning were fantastic. I just can't tell you how wonderful those students are. I've kept up with some, and it's just been a joy. Two of the Jefferson Scholars, two couples, you have probably told them this, got married. The first was Taylor Francis and Stephanie Sharples, and he proposed to her on the steps of the Jefferson Memorial. And by the way, now he's a fellow pilot, and I just heard that the Air Force has put him into a language course in Romanian. He is in Romania, studying Romania, and will be a military attaché. So I mean, his career has really turned. And Stephanie, his wife, is an advisor in genetics. She's a Brody School of Medicine at East Carolina. Somehow or another, with Taylor gone for all those years flying, she's been able to maintain a fantastic career and have 3 children. Now, this is the kind of challenge that Jefferson Scholars have overcome. Now, after the first decade, Curtis Fitzgerald, the dean in humanities and social sciences, liberal arts, did a study. Now, see if you can follow me on this. The university keeps various statistics and groups people in cohorts. The Jefferson Scholars are a cohort, and they compared it to other cohorts. No other cohort in the university had a greater distance between the actual grade point average and their predicted grade point average. Put it another way, in plain English. Jefferson Scholars were doing much better than their academic record and scores indicated that they should be. Now, why would that be so? Well, we didn't know. First of all, learning is pretty mysterious anyway. But our supposition was we were paying attention to them and getting to know them. If someone was messing up in a subject, we would know about it and sort of bring them aside and say, what's happened to you in Chaucer or your calculus course? And just faced with the possibility of those kind of questions being raised, I think that these Jefferson Scholars did much, much better than we would expect. Now, working with me was Gerald Elkin in the School of Agriculture. Ed Glazner always was paying attention. The big question was, what happened when we ran out of Kellogg money? Now, then, as possibly even now, the university didn't have as much money as we needed. And the Jefferson Scholars were not coming to meetings. And so we had a new dean. The dean that replaced Ed Glazner was Jim Oglinger. And we had a meeting out at the University Club with the Jefferson Scholars. And he was saying, well, look, we've had money for this program. We're not going to have money in the future, or much money. And should we just let this program die, a natural death? And it was sort of a shock. And one of the Jefferson Scholars, and I remember her well, Lena Srivastava. You all remember Lena? Well, she got emotional, and she stood up and started saying how important the Jefferson Scholars were to her. And as she talked, she got more and more choked up, and she started crying, but she was still speaking volumes through tears. And then other people started crying. Jim Oglinger got choked up, and right then and there decided, well, we're going to fund that program somehow. And that was really when, I think it was the tears of Lena that saved the program at that time. We applied for other money. We got money from Becton Dickinson. We got money from Novartis. Not as much as we thought. We thought Novartis was going to give us a big endowment. The CEO, or the big person who was in this country for Novartis, came to 2 of the Jefferson Scholar meetings and said, we got it, but something happened. Of course, it didn't have a good ring to it, Novartis Jefferson Scholars. So the name wasn't very good. But at any rate, that money did not come. But somehow or another, we pieced together the program, and it flourished. I have thought, because I also worked with the Park Scholars and was in their initiation, the Jefferson Scholars are every bit as good, if not better, than the Parks, because the Parks do not have a double major and do not have the broad perspective that the Jefferson Scholars have. One more feature that we put in, and this came after a couple of years. I remember one of the first class was I'll think of her name in a moment. This is what happens to old age. Dana Fitzsimmons. A bunch of us got together when they're getting close to their graduation, and she said, and her fellow students said it too, you faculty have told us a lot about the problems of the world, but you haven't begun to tell us what the solutions are. I mean, it was a charge that I sort of took. And how are we going to deal with this? And so we came up with the senior year seminar, which we thought would at least put students into a different mode of research and how you do solve problems. And I don't know how it's working now, though I think I do. I know it worked well then. For instance, in the first seminar, one student wrote her paper on the evolution of the camel. which I would have never thought about. I always heard that a camel was a horse put together by a committee, ho, ho, ho. But she did anthropological and paleological studies of bones and traced the evolution of the camel and then how it became domesticated and how it began changing society. And then she followed that up with graduate school and got her degree in the subject. And guess what her doctoral dissertation was on? The camel. And as I looked through the list of our alumni, so many Jefferson Scholars go into fields that you could have never predicted. Fortunately, medicine opened up, and so some went into medicine. One student, I won't tell you his name, you will probably know him. From the very beginning, he was one of those students that did everything methodically and was very careful and close to a straight A student. And he was going to med school all the way from the beginning. But when he took courses in liberal arts, that was when business was part of liberal arts, he took business courses so that he could maximize his earnings as a physician. And I kept saying, you know, this isn't, you're going to medicine, this might not be the sole reason you want to go into medicine. And I never wrote more letters of recommendation for anybody, and he kept getting turned down. And he applied to the University Medical School at Galveston, which was known for their humanities component to medicine. And they turned him down because he had not had enough humanities courses and because he had had too many business courses. And so that was the one person who tried to work the Jefferson Scholar program to his advantage, and it turned out to be a disadvantage. But he's a success and has overcome that. Now, let's see what else I may have possibly have left out. One more thing I'm going to just conclude with. A number of years ago, about 20, someone gave the university a lot of money for temporary use, and it would go to paying full expenses and stipend to the top 5 juniors rising to be seniors. And so we looked at the records and found, we said, well, let's get everybody that's got to start with everyone that's got a 4.0. There were over 10. And we found a few others, like that had a B. You know what the course, most likely that a student who was a 4.0 or would have been a 4.0, but had one course that knocked them out? Anybody? What? PE. That was one, and the other was. What'd you make in PE?
Let's just say I had to repeat a PE class to make what grade I will not say go away.
You want to guess what the other department was?
Organic.
No, I would have thought you'd have said that. English. English was pretty notorious in those days. I don't know what it is now. Y'all don't have to take English 112 anymore, do you? I mean, is that mandatory? Well, they used to knock them out. But let me tell you my experience with this. So we said, well, how are we going to narrow 10 down to 5? So, interview. And each one of the 10, I asked a question. I just sort of stumbled on it. But the question was this: you're doing really well in organic or in English, and do you see the possibility, the likelihood of so many stresses placed on the environment that there is going to be a general ecological crisis, the magnitude of which will be so great it will end the science industrial civilization we now have, and there is going to be a catastrophe resulting in enormous loss of life and a reduction of humankind to a very few. Guess what the answer was that they said? Now when I say they, all 10 were unanimous. You want to guess? Okay, that question is asked to you then. Will there be an ecological crisis, the magnitude of which is so great that it will lead to a catastrophe?
I think we're experiencing it now, right?
We're experiencing it now?
Yeah.
So the answer is yes.
Yeah.
Probably. That was a second follow-up, because everyone said yes. So the next question, do you consider it to be a likelihood or possibility? Now they divided on it. The next year I asked the same group, it was probably about 10, and I got the same answer. For 4 years in a row, every student was unanimous. Now, there's not many questions you can ask that you get that kind of uniformity. Now, let me tell you how disturbing that was to me. It was then, it is now. Because young people have got to believe that things are going to get better. You got to think that you older people have so screwed up this world that we're going to do better and save it. And if you don't think you can save it, you damn well think you're going to try. You can't be pessimistic. You've got to say you're going to make a better world. Now, I would have some follow-up, and I ask if somebody's majoring in chemical engineering or textiles. If you think there's going to be a catastrophe of that magnitude to humanity, why are you majoring in a subject that's going to make conditions worse, not better? I got various reactions to that. Some hostility. A couple of people cried. My fellow people on the faculty said, "Stop that line of questioning." But I was interested in the answer, and I still am. Now, I truly believe that Jefferson Scholar is the right combination of academic approach, because no matter what you learn in your major, you've got to apply it in a human setting. And the Jefferson Scholar Program is exactly what is needed. So I am so thankful we have people like you that's going to make things better and not screw up the way we have. Thank you all very much.